Michael, and what a great performance you've done in this film. This is your first movie role. You're playing Michael Jackson, okay? That's as big as you.
A pitch-black studio, dead silence, and then, bam! A single spotlight cuts through the dark, locking onto a lone silhouette. The figure shifts, snaps into that impossible 45-degree tilt, and effortlessly locks a gravity-defying toe stand. It is so scary accurate. Your brain literally short-circuits. For a split second, you're convinced you're looking at a ghost. But nope, that is Jaafar Jackson. And the crazy transformation he just pulled off? It honestly left the entire internet completely speechless. The metamorphosis inside the making of Michael. All right, let's get into the absolute meat of this story, because what happened on the closed sets of this movie is nothing short of wild. When Hollywood first announced they were making a massive, big-budget biopic about the King of Pop, the entire internet collectively sighed. We've all seen standard run-of-the-mill biopics before. Usually, an actor puts on a funky wig, does a subpar impression, lip-syncs poorly to a studio track, and we all just kind of pretend it looks good. But director Antoine Fuqua wasn't playing around. He knew that to capture the essence of the most famous entertainer to ever walk the earth, he couldn't just hire a regular actor. He needed someone who had the rhythm, the look, and the actual genetic blueprint of a Jackson. Enter Jaafar. When Jaafar was officially cast, the pressure wasn't just high, it was stratospheric. People were highly skeptical, throwing around words like nepotism before a single frame was even shot. But then, the first official production images and leaked paparazzi footage dropped, and the internet completely melted down. Look closely at how Jaafar naturally channels that specific youthful energy from the off-the-wall and thriller eras. It isn't just about throwing on a vintage shirt or wearing a retro afro wig. It's the structure of the face, the exact shape of the smile, and that unmistakable, intense gaze. When those first production stills made the rounds, people weren't just surprised. They were genuinely spooked by how uncanny the resemblance was. It was like looking at a localized glitch in the Matrix. But looking the part is only about 5% of the battle. The real magic and the brutal reality happened behind the scenes during a grueling, multi-layered physical transformation that pushed Jaafar to his absolute limits. We are talking about a daily routine that would make even the most seasoned MCU actors tap out. First up, let's talk about the physical breakdown. Michael Jackson had a highly specific, lean, almost dancer-hybrid physique. He was incredibly wiry, but possessed insane core strength, explosive speed, and flexibility. Jaafar had to completely overhaul his lifestyle to match that exact build. He spent hours every single day working out with specialized physical trainers, not to build bulky muscle, but to achieve a high-stamina, shredded dancer's frame. His diet was strictly monitored, mirroring the incredibly clean, lean protein diets Michael used to sustain himself during grueling world tours. And then came the dance rehearsals. Oh man, the dancing. To pull this off, the production brought in the absolute best of the best, including choreographers who had actually worked alongside Michael himself. Jaafar wasn't just learning a few steps for a quick montage sequence. He had to master the mechanics of the moonwalk, the iconic spin, the sharp percussive pops, and the fluid jazz-style isolations that made his uncle a global phenomenon. We're talking about 8 to 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, in a sweaty dance studio, breaking down archival footage frame by frame. Every single head tilt, every finger snap, and every heel drop had to be perfectly identical. If his foot was even 2 inches out of alignment during the Billie Jean sequence, they would wipe the slate and start over. It was a level of perfectionism that perfectly mirrored Michael's own legendary work ethic. Jaafar openly admitted that he looked to extreme method actors like Daniel Day-Lewis and Christian Bale, realizing that to play Michael Jackson, he couldn't just act like him when the camera was rolling. He had to practically live in his skin. But the physical exhaustion didn't stop when the dance rehearsals ended. Next was the makeup chair, transforming a modern 20-something into Michael Jackson across multiple decades of his life required some of the most advanced prosthetic work Hollywood has ever seen. On heavy shooting days, Jaafar would have to sit completely still in a makeup chair for 3 to 5 hours before the director even called action. Special effects, makeup artists meticulously applied subtle prosthetics to match the shifting contours of Michael's face over the years, handling everything from the iconic jawline to the complex skin adjustments required to respectfully and accurately portray Michael's battle with vitiligo. Imagine sitting in a chair at 3 a.m., having layers of silicone, paint, and hairpieces glued to your face, and then turning around to perform a high-energy, physically demanding dance number under scorching studio lights for another 12 hours. It takes an unbelievable amount of psychological grit. Speaking of psychological grit, let's talk about the vocals. This was a massive point of anxiety for fans. How do you replicate a voice that is instantly recognizable to literally billions of people? The production used a highly sophisticated blend of Jaafar's actual singing voice mixed with Michael's original master tracks, which meant Jaafar had to undergo intense vocal training. He didn't just have to sing the high notes. He had to master the vocal hiccups, the sharp ad-libs, and the gentle, breathy speaking register that Michael used in private interviews. He spent months working with top-tier vocal coaches, listening to raw studio isolation tapes, learning exactly when Michael would take a breath, and how he used percussive vocalizations as an instrument. When you fuse all of these elements together, the brutal workouts, the endless dance drills, the grueling hours in the makeup chair, and the intense vocal reconstruction, you get a transformation that transcends a simple Hollywood performance. It became a full-blown spiritual possession. Crew members on set frequently reported that when the cameras started rolling and Jaafar stepped into the light, a heavy, reverent silence would wash over the room. It wasn't just that he looked like Michael, he carried the exact same heavy electric aura. He captured the unique duality of his uncle, the incredibly shy, soft-spoken kid off-camera who instantly mutated into an untoppable, fiercely confident force of nature the second he stepped onto a stage. By the time the movie dropped in April 2026, the skepticism evaporated. The film absolutely crushed the global box office, raking in nearly $1 billion and cementing itself as a historic cultural event. While critics naturally debated the narrative structure of such a massive, complex life story, they were almost entirely unanimous on one thing. Jaafar Jackson's performance was an absolute masterpiece of acting. He didn't just give us a cheap imitation, he gave the world an honest, deeply human look at a myth. But how do you step into the shoes of a global ghost when that ghost is your own flesh and blood? The DNA of greatness, growing up a Jackson. Jaafar pulled off the impossible, but his transformation didn't actually start in a Hollywood makeup chair. It started in the cradle. Growing up with the last name Jackson isn't just a cool trivia fact you drop at a college party. It's a heavy, lifelong reality that shapes every single thing you do. Imagine your family tree being a literal blueprint for modern pop culture. Born to Jermaine Jackson and Alejandra Genevieve Oaziaza, Jaafar was dropped straight into the eye of a permanent media hurricane. He grew up inside the legendary Encino estate, a sprawling compound saturated with music history, gold records, and the echoes of the Jackson 5. But living in a house built by music royalty comes with a unique set of psychological rules. While regular kids were learning their ABCs, Jaafar was subconsciously absorbing the rhythms of legendary family jam sessions. Yet, the family dynamics were incredibly intricate. His father, Jermaine, was a massive superstar in his own right, famously holding down the bass and co-lead vocals for the Jackson 5 before launching a highly successful solo career. Growing up under Jermaine's roof meant that excellence wasn't just encouraged, it was the baseline expectation. There was a profound reverence for the craft of entertainment, a quiet understanding that a stage wasn't just a platform, but a sacred space that required absolute dedication. However, having that legendary DNA is a classic double-edged sword. From the moment he could walk, the public eye was tracking him. watching to see if he had inherited even a fraction of that family magic. It's a terrifying amount of pressure for a kid. Think about it. Every time you pick up a microphone or bust out a dance move at a family gathering, people aren't just judging you against other kids your age. They are comparing you to the most influential musical dynasty in human history. The shadow cast by the Jackson 5, and specifically by his Uncle Michael, was a permanent fixture in his life. It was a massive, looming monument of success that could easily crush a young artist's confidence before they even find their voice. Instead of buckling under that immense weight, the Jackson family compound functioned as a strict but deeply nurturing greenhouse for talent. Jaafar and his siblings were surrounded by a fiercely protective family structure that shielded them from the harsher realities of paparazzi culture, while simultaneously instilling an old-school, rigorous work ethic. His mother, Alejandra, played a crucial role in keeping things grounded, ensuring that despite the glittering history surrounding them, the kids maintained a sense of normalcy and personal identity. They weren't just props in a legacy. They were kids trying to figure out who they were in a world that already thought it knew everything about them. Jaafar spent his youth navigating this delicate, high-stakes tightrope. He watched his cousins, his aunts, and his uncles navigate the intense highs and brutal lows of global fame. He saw firsthand the heavy toll that the crown takes on the head that wears it. This wasn't some distant Hollywood fairy tale to him, it was his family's daily reality. He learned very early on that talent alone wasn't enough to survive in the entertainment industry. You needed an armored mindset, a deep respect for the audience, and an almost spiritual connection to the art itself. This deep-rooted family training became the secret weapon he would later deploy on the set of the biopic. He didn't have to research what it felt like to be a Jackson under a microscope. He had been living it his entire life. Yet, despite the overwhelming public narrative that the Jacksons were a family entirely defined by their public performances, the reality behind closed doors was vastly different. Away from the flashing cameras, the stadium screams, and the constant media speculation, they were still a family that gathered for holidays, shared quiet dinners, and passed down personal stories that the public would never read about in a tabloid. Living in the shadow of a legend is one thing, but Jaafar shared a bond with Michael that the public rarely saw. The uncle and the nephew, private memories behind closed doors. To the rest of the world, Michael Jackson was a mythical figure, a larger-than-life icon who seemed to belong more to the cosmos than to planet Earth. But to a young Jaafar, he was simply Uncle Michael. This distinction is everything. While the public was analyzing every single frame of the music videos, Jaafar was experiencing the man behind the myth in the quiet, unguarded spaces of family life. Growing up, Jaafar got to witness the side of Michael that the media routinely missed. The incredibly warm, playful, and fiercely protective family man who just wanted the kids in his life to experience pure joy. Jaafar's childhood memories of Michael are filled with a sense of wonder. He recalls visits to Neverland Ranch, which wasn't just an amusement park, but a sanctuary where the normal rules of a chaotic world didn't apply. Jaafar remembers an uncle who would lose himself in water balloon fights, laugh hysterically at simple jokes, and sit on the floor to play video games with his nephews and nieces. In those private moments, there was no shadow of the king of pop. There was just a man who possessed a deeply gentle, almost childlike spirit, someone who fiercely cherished the innocence of youth because his own had been stolen from him by early stardom.
My childhood was completely taken away from me. There was no Christmas, there was no birthdays. It was not a normal childhood, no normal pleasures of childhood. Those were exchanged for hard work, struggle, and pain.
But it wasn't all just fun and games. Even at a young age, Jaafar was incredibly observant, watching how Michael carried himself when the music started playing. He saw how Michael's entire energy shifted the second he entered a creative space. Michael was an artistic sponge, and he passed that exact philosophy down to the next generation. Jaafar recalls quiet, intimate conversations where his uncle would give the kids advice about life and art. Michael didn't lecture them like a strict teacher. Instead, he would speak in poetic, inspiring terms about finding your own truth. He would tell Jaafar to listen to the sounds of nature, to pay attention to the rhythm of the wind, and to understand that music wasn't just something you wrote. It was something that already existed in the universe, waiting for you to capture it. One of the most profound lessons Jaafar took from his uncle was the absolute necessity of emotional honesty in performance. Michael used to tell him that the audience can instantly spot a fake. If you don't feel the emotion of a song in your actual soul, the crowd won't feel it either. This advice deeply resonated with Jaafar, staying locked away in his mind for years. He watched how Michael would sit with a pad of paper, obsessively writing lyrics, or how he would dance in front of a mirror until he was completely drenched in sweat, chasing a perfection that only he could see. It was a masterclass in dedication, delivered by the undisputed master of the craft. When Michael tragically passed away in June 2009, the world stopped spinning for a moment. For the public, it was the loss of a musical titan. But for a 12-year-old Jaafar, it was a devastating personal earthquake. The gentle uncle who had given him hugs, shared creative wisdom, and provided a safe haven from the outside world was suddenly gone. The grief was immense, amplified by the fact that the entire globe was mourning alongside them, plastering his uncle's face on every television screen and magazine cover. It was during this period of intense family grief that the lessons Michael left behind began to truly crystallize in Jaafar's mind. He realized that the best way to honor his uncle's memory wasn't just to mourn his absence, but to carry forward the artistic torch he had left behind. As Jaafar grew into a teenager, he found himself constantly returning to those private conversations and the quiet advice whispered to him behind closed doors. He began to understand that Michael's legendary status wasn't just a product of luck. It was forged through an almost terrifying amount of discipline and an unyielding love for the audience. Jaafar began to apply that exact same reverence to his own artistic endeavors, vowing that if he ever stepped into the public arena, he would do so with the absolute highest level of integrity. Armed with his uncle's advice, Jaafar didn't actually start his journey in front of a movie camera. He started it with a microphone. The solo journey, before the moonwalk. Before Hollywood ever called his name, Jaafar was determined to make a mark purely on his own terms. He didn't want to just step into a pre-packaged legacy. He wanted to earn his stripes. For years, he quietly worked in the background, developing his voice and figuring out what a Jaafar Jackson record should actually sound like. He didn't want to just copy the percussive, high-energy pop sounds of his famous uncles. Instead, he dug deep into a completely different well of musical inspiration, finding himself drawn to the timeless, velvety vocal textures of classic crooners like Frank Sinatra and Johnny Mathis, alongside the rich, complex soul of Stevie Wonder. This deep appreciation for the golden eras of music gave Jaafar a highly sophisticated palate. He wasn't interested in chasing temporary radio trends. He wanted to build something built to last. In 2019, he finally decided it was time to show the world what he had been cooking up in the studio. He released his highly anticipated debut single, Got Me Singing, and it took a lot of people by surprise. Instead of a loud, explosive pop anthem loaded with heavy synths and dramatic vocal runs, the track was a smooth, incredibly breezy slice of contemporary R&B, laced with a distinct South American, Rio de Janeiro-inspired acoustic vibe. The music video for Got Me Singing showcased a side of Jaafar the public hadn't fully anticipated. Filmed on location in Brazil, the visuals were vibrant, colorful, and completely focused on rhythm, community, and romance. While his dance movements in the video were undeniably smooth, fluid, and filled with that effortless Jackson grace, he consciously avoided using trademark family choreography. There were no aggressive crotch grabs, no sharp hats tilted over one eye, and absolutely no moonwalking. He was intentionally keeping his family identity in his back pocket. He wanted the audience to focus entirely on his unique vocal delivery, a warm, soulful tenor that felt incredibly intimate. The reception to his solo music was an important stepping stone for his confidence. It proved to critics and skeptics alike that Jaafar wasn't just a coasting beneficiary of nepotism. He actually had the raw vocal goods and the artistic restraint to back it up. He followed up his debut by dropping acoustic covers and writing a vault of unreleased material, constantly sharpening his songwriting pen. He spent years in the trenches of the indie music scene, navigating the brutal realities of the modern streaming landscape where a famous last name might get you an initial meeting. but it certainly won't keep an audience listening if the music isn't good. During this solo era, Jaafar was operating under a very specific personal manifesto: protect the family name by building his own separate pillar. He was fiercely defensive of his individuality, often turning down opportunities that felt too gimmicky or relied too heavily on his family's iconic imagery. He wanted to be a respected R&B singer-songwriter who just happened to be a Jackson, not a caricature living off past family glories. This period of artistic independence was absolutely vital because it gave him a grounded sense of self. He learned how to command a stage on his own merits, how to handle the pressure of live performance, and how to connect with an audience using nothing but a microphone and a melody. He was completely content building this independent path brick by brick. He was planning more music releases, mapping out potential live showcases, and slowly carving out a highly dedicated, organic fan base that appreciated his specific smooth R&B aesthetic. His life was moving in a steady, comfortable direction, and he was completely focused on the slow burn of a long-term musical career. He was carving his own path perfectly fine until a single phone call from Hollywood changed his destiny forever. The heavy crown, finding his own path versus following the footsteps. Stepping out of the recording studio and onto a massive Hollywood movie set meant that Jaafar had to completely dismantle the protective wall he had spent years building around his individuality. For his entire youth and early 20s, his goal had been simple: avoid the comparisons, dodge the imitation traps, and make sure people saw Jaafar, the R&B artist, not just another Jackson. But when he accepted the title role in Michael, he had to make a complete psychological 180-degree turn. He had to willingly run straight into the center of the comparison storm. He had to accept the fact that for the next 2 years of his life, he would be judged by the most unforgiving, hypercritical standard in the history of entertainment. The psychological tightrope he had to walk during this period was incredibly intense. On one hand, he felt a deep, profound familial obligation to protect his uncle's legacy. He knew that if a random Hollywood insider took the role, they might lean into cheap caricatures, surface-level mannerisms, or sensationalized media tropes. Jaafar wanted to give his uncle a performance rooted in genuine love, nuance, and human dignity. But on the other hand, he had to grapple with the terrifying reality of losing himself in the process. When you spend 10 hours a day, every day, speaking like someone else, moving like someone else, and looking in the mirror only to see someone else's face staring back at you, the lines of reality can start to blur. It takes a massive amount of mental grounding to not let the gravity of that persona swallow your own identity whole. The internet, as it always does, did not make this journey any easier. The moment his casting was announced, the online discourse became a total battlefield. Skeptics ran wild on social media, claiming that casting a family member was a safe, sanitized choice designed to gloss over the complex, controversial chapters of Michael's life. Others argued that the pressure would simply be too much for a first-time actor, predicting that Jaafar would choke under the glare of a $100 million production. Jaafar was fully aware of the chatter. Instead of logging onto Twitter to defend himself or engaging in public back and forths, he did exactly what his uncle Michael used to do. He went completely silent, locked the studio doors, and let the work do the talking. This silent discipline paid off in spades. As the production rolled on, the narrative completely shifted from skeptical doubt to absolute awe. Jaafar managed to achieve something that very few actors in a biopic ever pull off. He found the human being inside the icon. He didn't just mimic the hee-hees and the iconic spins. He captured the quiet, lonely moments of a man who was simultaneously the most adored and the most isolated person on the planet. He balanced the heavy crown of the Jackson legacy by infusing the performance with his own artistic sensitivity. He used his personal knowledge of how his family operates, how they speak to each other when the curtains close, and how they protect one another from a hyper-invasive world to give the character a raw, grounded vulnerability that no outsider could have ever replicated. Ultimately, by embracing the footsteps of his uncle so fully, Jaafar actually ended up carving his own unique path. He proved to the world that he wasn't just a passive spectator in his family's history, nor was he a cheap copycat. He emerged from the project as a formidable, powerhouse dramatic actor capable of carrying a massive, multi-generational epic entirely on his shoulders. He transformed the heavy, suffocating weight of the Jackson name into a brilliant, shining vehicle for his own artistic breakthrough. With the weight of the world on his shoulders, the final question remains: did he actually pull off the impossible? Beyond the illusion. When the final credits rolled at the world premiere of Michael, the reaction inside the theater wasn't just standard polite applause. It was a wave of emotional shock. Industry veterans, hard-nosed critics, and die-hard fans who had spent decades analyzing every single detail of the King of Pop's life sat in stunned silence before erupting into a massive standing ovation. Jaafar didn't just pull off the impossible, he completely redefined what a biographical performance could be. By refusing to deliver a surface-level impression, he managed to pierce through the decades of myth, controversy, and larger-than-life iconography to reveal the actual breathing, feeling human being underneath the sequined glove. The global box office numbers that followed were a testament to the sheer power of that cinematic magic. Crushing records worldwide and sailing past the billion-dollar milestone, the movie didn't just succeed, it became a historical cultural moment. But the true victory of this project doesn't belong to the studio executives or the box office accountants. It belongs entirely to Jaafar. He took the absolute heaviest crown in pop culture history, a burden that many assumed would completely crush his young career, and he wore it with an unimaginable amount of grace, dignity, and raw artistic power. But what makes this entire phenomenon even more fascinating is the fresh angle it brings to the modern entertainment landscape. Jaafar didn't just give us a nostalgia trip. In a Hollywood era dominated by synthetic AI generation and hyper-polished, deep-faked digital content, Jaafar brought something entirely irreplaceable back to the screen: raw, old-school human effort. He reminded us that no matter how advanced technology becomes, it can never replicate the sheer grit of an actor spending 10 hours a day in a sweaty dance studio, breaking down body mechanics frame by frame, and channeling an aura that is literally woven into his own DNA.
I think that really was a spiritual journey for me, just to be in that same energy, to sit in that space, but also just to dance for hours and hours every day and look at it as a full-time job.
This wasn't a digital trick. It was a flesh and blood triumph that forced the entire industry to remember the value of true dedicated craftsmanship. Now that the dust has finally settled on this massive cinematic event, the world is looking at Jaafar with an entirely new level of respect. The lazy labels of nepotism and the skeptical social media doubts have completely vanished, replaced by an intense, widespread curiosity about what this powerhouse talent will do next. He is no longer just a bearer of a famous last name, nor is he merely a ghost of his uncle's past. By diving headfirst into the terrifying shadow of Michael Jackson, Jaafar managed to step completely out of it. Whether he chooses to return to the recording studio to bless us with more of his signature smooth, breezy R&B sounds, or decides to continue conquering Hollywood as a premier dramatic leading man, one thing is absolutely certain: Jaafar Jackson has officially arrived. He has claimed his own rightful seat at the table of entertainment royalty entirely on his own merits. The jaw-dropping transformation may have initially left the internet completely speechless, but the incredible career he is building next is going to have the whole world talking for a very, very long time. What a wild ride it's been watching Jaafar completely shatter everyone's expectations and breathe new life into an untouchable legacy. The Jackson family dynasty clearly isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and honestly, we are absolutely here for it. What did you think of his mind-blowing transformation? Let us know down below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.